Back in the fall season of 2022, Chainsaw Man dominated anime discussions, with the manga of Chainsaw Man being very popular and well regarded inside and outside of Japan, before the anime was even announced. It makes sense that it seems to have been the most anticipated new anime of the year. The hype before the anime release was really large, and for the most part it seems to have delivered, with the anime being mostly faithful to the manga and featuring impressive art and animation. Personally, I found the Chainsaw Man anime to be quite good, though I didn't quite find it as good as many others. One thing I felt was often lacking was the impact from a lot of the scenes. Many scenes to me felt as though they didn't quite hit as hard as they should have based on what was going on. While most people were happy with the adaptation, there were some people who weren't happy with it, primarily some Japanese people. One of the reasons for this seems to have been an interview with the director, where the director seemed condescending towards some things common in anime. The other reason, which I think is far more interesting to talk about, is the director's focus on cinematic realism, which he also mentions in the interview. In the Chainsaw Man anime, there are a lot of angles that seem to be more common in live action than in animation, likely due to the difficulty of executing these angles in animation. And there are also certain effects like shaky cam that are much more common in live action than animation. So the anime takes a lot of inspiration from live action. That in itself I don't think is a bad thing or something that anyone minds. Where I think this approach of cinematic realism becomes more controversial is in how it seems like the director limited what was allowed to be done in the anime to what is possible in live action. One critique that a fair amount of people had for the adaptation was that the comedy didn't hit quite as hard as in the manga due to lack of things like exaggerated expressions. While this is fairly important, I think these limitations also has a fairly large impact on other aspects of the adaptation. Each form of media, whether live action, 2D animation, 3D animation, or stop motion, comes with their own advantages. For 2D animation, I would say a huge advantage is that since it's based on drawings, the art style can easily be drastically changed, while also feeling cohesive. Because of this, the art and animation can be made to suit the scenes perfectly and highlight different emotions and moods much better than you can without this artistic freedom. This works for comedy, but also works well for more serious emotions like rage or sadness. Similarly, manga can also change art style from panel to panel. I think a good example is Berserk, which most of the time has a realistic look, but sometimes go away from this realism, for instance to showcase Guts' rage. Another advantage of changing the art style for some scenes is that they stand out more and will be easier to remember. These things are not just true for Japanese animation, but also for Western 2D animation. Hell, lately Western 3D animation like Arcane, Spider-Verse, and Puss in Boots: The Last Wish has implemented 2D animation for similar effects and has been praised for it. By implementing different art style for certain scenes in Chainsaw Man, I think they would have made these scenes stand out much more and be a lot more memorable with people associating a certain visual to a scene, rather than just remembering the scene due to the story and remembering that it looked good. While the anime episodes themselves for Chainsaw Man were heavily restricted to a specific style, this restriction does not apply to the opening and the endings. The endings are especially interesting, with there being one ending per episode, with this ending then representing the events from that specific episode. Many of these endings having an art style different from the anime, and within the ending the art style can often change. There's also a lot of visual creativity in these endings. While certain things might have been a bit too much out there to be implemented in the anime, I think some of the elements of the endings could have been implemented in some scenes of the anime. For instance, I think the less defined lines used in ending 2, as well as the Evangelion reference of the opening, could have worked well in some fight scenes, especially during Denji's fight with the Infinity Devil to add some intensity. The color use in ending 2 could also work really well during some fight scenes as well. I also think for comedy scenes that they could have sometimes used an art style more similar to the fourth ending, and for some of the slice of life scenes that they could have gone for a style more similar to to the second ending. I don't think these different art styles should dominate most of the anime, but rather, like most anime, that they could have had a main style, which is the more realistic take they went for, and then use different art styles for certain scenes. Things might have sounded a bit negative, but by no means do I think that this is a horrible or bad adaptation. I think on a technical level, the animation is really great, and you have videos like, for instance, the one by the Canipa effect that highlights the talents that worked on the anime and goes into detail about the brilliance of some of the animated scenes. However, I do think that given the amount of talent they had on the anime, and given the creativity showcased in the endings, that it could have ended up being a lot better if more creativity had been allowed in the animation, rather than everything being confined to what is possible in live action. So, in conclusion, I think Chainsaw Man is a really well animated show and a good adaptation, but I do think that it could have been even better if more creativity was allowed in the animation, and I don't think limiting what an anime can do to what is possible in live action is a good directorial choice.